US President Donald Trump has said that he believes Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro's days in power are numbered, while rejecting suggestions that Washington is preparing for war with Caracas. In a wide-ranging interview with CBS's 60 Minutes, Trump also confirmed that the United States is preparing to resume nuclear weapons testing, a move that would mark the country's first detonation in more than 3 decades. When asked about global nuclear competition, Trump said, "Russia's testing and China's testing, but they don't talk about it. You know, we're an open society. We're different. We talk about it. We have to talk about it because otherwise you people are going to report. They don't have reporters that are going to be writing about it." We do. His tone was defensive but resolute. Trump argued that transparency distinguished the US from its rivals, framing media scrutiny as both a burden and a mark of democratic openness. The journalist pressed further. O'Donnell asked whether the United States was now preparing to detonate nuclear weapons again, breaking a moratorium that had lasted for more than 3 decades. Trump did not hesitate. "I'm saying that we're going to test nuclear weapons like other countries do, yes." It was a statement that sent shockwaves through the international community. For decades, Washington had adhered to the spirit of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, even without full ratification. Trump's remarks signaled a potential departure from that restraint, invoking Cold War-era tensions in a world already strained by regional conflicts and economic divisions. When O'Donnell asked why such tests were necessary, Trump offered justification grounded in competitive logic. Well, because you have to see how they work. You know, you do have to. And the reason I'm saying testing is because Russia announced that they were going to be doing a test. If you notice, North Korea is testing constantly. Other countries are testing. We're the only country that doesn't test, and I don't want to be the only country that doesn't test. The exchange reflected a broader shift in Washington's defense doctrine, one that prioritized deterrence and demonstration of strength over arms control diplomacy. Analysts later noted that Trump's comments aligned with earlier Pentagon discussions under Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, emphasizing strategic readiness amid renewed global nuclear competition. But the conversation soon turned south toward the Caribbean and the growing friction between Washington and Caracas. When O'Donnell asked, on the way to the Caribbean, "Are we going to war against Venezuela?" Trump paused, then responded in his characteristic style, "I doubt it. I don't think so. But they've been treating us very badly, not only on drugs. They've dumped hundreds of thousands of people into our country that we didn't want, people from prisons. They emptied their prisons into our country. They also, if you take a look, they emptied their mental institutions and their insane asylums into the United States of America because Joe Biden was the worst president in the history of our country." The comment drew immediate global attention, both for its tone and its implications. Trump had dismissed the likelihood of war, but the accusation that Venezuela had deliberately sent prisoners and mentally ill individuals across borders added a sharp diplomatic edge to his statement. At the time of the interview, US naval forces were conducting operations in the Caribbean and Pacific, targeting vessels allegedly linked to drug trafficking. According to the Pentagon, these missions had resulted in multiple strikes, with at least 15 separate incidents since early September 2025. Cumulative reports indicated that more than 65 people had been killed, a statistic that fueled accusations of excessive force and extrajudicial killings. In one video posted on social media by US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, a US strike on a small vessel in the Pacific was shown, resulting in 4 fatalities. Hegseth wrote that the operation was part of a broader campaign to eliminate narco-terror routes threatening American lives. The footage, filmed at night and confirmed by Pentagon sources, quickly went viral, sparking both praise and condemnation. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro responded defiantly from Caracas. Appearing on state broadcaster VTV on October 27th, he announced a sweeping decision to halt bilateral cooperation in the energy sector. "I have approved the precautionary measure of immediately suspending all effects of the energy agreement and everything agreed upon in this matter. It is a precautionary measure that I have the authority to take as president, and I have approved and signed it. Everything is suspended. The suspension effectively froze the remnants of what had once been limited energy dialogue between Caracas and Washington, remnants that persisted despite years of US sanctions and strained diplomacy. Maduro, who faces drug trafficking indictments in US courts, accused Washington of using anti-narcotics operations as a cover for regime change. He told Venezuelan media that the United States was attempting to weaponize drug enforcement to justify military pressure and take control of Venezuela's oil. His government statement came as US Southern Command confirmed continued naval patrols in the Caribbean and the Pacific. These operations were officially aimed at combating drug trafficking networks, but in practice they coincided with growing political pressure on Maduro's leadership. In the interview, Trump was asked directly whether he believed Maduro's rule was near its end. His answer was brief but pointed. I would say yes. I think so, yes. That sentence, delivered calmly, became the headline across much of Latin America and beyond. Trump says Maduro's days are numbered. US officials did not elaborate on any immediate policy shift, but military observers noted a steady build-up of assets in the region. Several US Navy destroyers remain deployed in the Caribbean Sea, along with surveillance aircraft and Coast Guard cutters operating near Venezuelan waters. Within days, Defense Secretary Hegseth released additional footage showing what he described as overnight US strikes on an alleged smuggling boat. The images taken from aerial reconnaissance cameras depicted explosions lighting up the dark ocean, another in a string of targeted operations. Human rights groups condemned the escalation. Independent experts cited the reported death toll of more than 60 individuals as evidence of a pattern of extrajudicial killings, even when the victims were suspected traffickers. Amnesty International called for a United Nations investigation into the legality of these strikes, warning that the absence of judicial oversight risked normalizing lethal force in international waters. In Caracas, state television portrayed the US operations as acts of aggression. The Venezuelan Defense Ministry described the attacks as imperialist hostilities disguised as anti-drug missions. Meanwhile, public rallies in the capital featured banners declaring Venezuela will not surrender. Diplomatic analysts observed that Trump's remarks came at a politically sensitive moment. Venezuela was preparing for parliamentary elections under tight state control, while US intelligence assessments suggested increasing internal strain within the Maduro government. Washington's position, however, remained officially ambiguous. The White House did not confirm any regime change policy, and Trump himself downplayed the prospect of direct confrontation. Still, his statement, Maduro's days are numbered, left little doubt about his broader outlook. Regional governments reacted cautiously. Brazil's foreign ministry issued a brief note urging restraint and adherence to international law. Colombia's president called for constructive engagement, while Mexico reiterated its policy of non-intervention. At the United Nations, a spokesperson for Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the organization was monitoring developments with concern, emphasizing the need to prevent escalation. Meanwhile, reports from Venezuelan ports indicated increased military activity. Satellite images analyzed by maritime intelligence firms showed Venezuelan naval units redeploying near La Guaira and Puerto Cabello. US intelligence agencies reportedly tracked these movements as precautionary responses to the American presence offshore. Throughout this period, domestic tensions in Venezuela deepened. Power shortages and inflation persisted, while government media framed the crisis as evidence of Washington's economic warfare. Independent outlets facing censorship reported growing civilian frustration over food and fuel scarcity. Trump's interview, broadcast globally, drew swift commentary across media networks. CBS emphasized the dual nature of his remarks, reassurance on avoiding war, but alarm over nuclear testing and regime change implications. Analysts noted that his statements, though unannounced policy, reflected continuity with earlier rhetoric favoring maximum pressure against Maduro. In subsequent days, US officials declined to clarify whether new sanctions or covert operations were planned. A senior administration aide speaking anonymously to multiple outlets said, "The president meant exactly what he said. The Venezuelan regime is unsustainable. But we're not talking about military intervention." Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth later reinforced the administration's posture during a televised address. He stated that US operations in the Caribbean remain focused on counter-narcotics objectives and denied any link to political objectives in Venezuela. Still, the coordination between public messaging, naval maneuvers, and the president's rhetoric suggested an escalating strategic campaign, one aimed at tightening pressure without crossing into open conflict. By early November, tensions in the region remained high. Venezuelan authorities continued to claim sovereignty violations by US aircraft and naval vessels, while Washington insisted its missions were conducted in international waters under international law. Political observers noted that the interplay between Trump's statements and Hegseth's operational briefings mirrored previous US approaches toward adversarial regimes, combining public deterrence with covert pressure. Inside Caracas, Maduro's government maintained defiance. State media replayed his declaration, "Everything is suspended," as a symbol of national resistance. Outside Venezuela, humanitarian organizations warned that the renewed standoff risked worsening regional instability. Thousands of Venezuelan migrants continued to cross into neighboring Colombia and Brazil, straining border resources and humanitarian networks. As the first week of November approached, both Washington and Caracas appeared locked in a familiar cycle: political defiance, military posturing, and rhetorical escalation. For now, Trump's assertion and that Nicolás Maduro's presidency is nearing its end remains a statement of intent rather than confirmed reality. Yet the presence of US warships off Venezuela's coast and the ongoing air and sea strikes in surrounding waters ensure that the confrontation continues to shape the strategic balance in the Western Hemisphere. The situation remains tense but short of open conflict. The United States maintains its operations under the banner of counter-narcotics enforcement. Venezuela frames them as foreign aggression. In Washington, officials insist diplomacy remains possible. In Caracas, the government vows to resist what it calls imperialist coercion. As of now, the Caribbean remains calm but heavily patrolled. The statements exchanged across the airwaves and seas reflect a fragile equilibrium, one that could shift quickly with the next word or strike. Donald Trump says he believes Nicolás Maduro's days as president are numbered. The world now watches to see whether that prediction becomes policy or remains a warning across contested waters.